My name is Cecilia Hartwell. I am 35 years old, and the moment that destroyed my family began with my 8-year-old daughter reaching for a Christmas cookie. She had barely touched the edge of the plate when my younger brother stepped between her and the table. He told her she had not been given permission and ordered her to put it back. My daughter looked toward my mother, who had already told the children they could have one, then quietly reached again. My brother grabbed her shoulder and shoved her hard enough to send her crashing onto the hardwood floor. Her knee struck the leg of a dining chair, and she caught herself with one wrist before crying out in pain. Instead of helping her up, he looked down and called her a spoiled brat. I rushed across the room as my husband moved beside me. My daughter was shaking, clutching her wrist, and asking what she had done wrong. My mother immediately said my brother had not meant to push her. My father told me to quit overreacting and warned me not to ruin Christmas over an accident. But I had seen my brother's face before he touched her. That was not an accident. I helped my daughter stand, took several photographs of her swelling knee, and asked everyone in the room not to delete any videos they had recorded that evening. Then I took her hand, looked directly at my brother and my parents, and said, "See you in court." No one moved. My brother's smile disappeared. And for the first time that night, my parents had nothing to say. Before I tell you what happened after we walked out, tell me, what is the weather like where you are? Does it match your mood right now? And where are you watching from? I am curious to see how far this story will travel. My husband's name was Jonah Hartwell, and our daughter was Phoebe. During the drive to pediatric urgent care, Phoebe barely spoke. She held her wrist against her chest and stared through the car window as Christmas lights blurred past us. Every few minutes, she asked the same question. Had she done something bad by reaching for the cookie? Each time I told her no. I explained that even if a child broke a rule, an adult was never allowed to shove, frighten, or humiliate her. Jonah worked as a physical therapist, so he knew enough about joint injuries to be concerned about the swelling around her wrist. He stayed calm for Phoebe, but I could see the anger in the way his hands tightened around the steering wheel. At the clinic, the doctor examined Phoebe's knee and wrist, ordered x-rays, and documented every bruise. Nothing was broken, but she had a mild wrist sprain and a deep contusion where her knee had struck the chair. The doctor took photographs without permission and recorded Phoebe's description without asking leading questions. Phoebe said my younger brother became angry because she reached for a cookie after her grandmother told the children they could take one. She said he grabbed her shoulder, pushed her, and called her a brat. Hearing my daughter repeat those words in a small, embarrassed voice made everything feel worse. My brother's name was Bryce Aldridge. He was 32, recently unemployed, and living with our parents, Denise and Martin Aldridge. Bryce had spent most of his adult life blaming others for his problems. He had lost his job as an assistant restaurant manager after screaming at an employee in front of customers. But my parents insisted the company had treated him unfairly. According to them, Bryce was always misunderstood, always stressed, and always one opportunity away from proving everyone wrong. The doctor advised us to file a police report because Fee's injury resulted from intentional physical contact. The next morning, Jonah and I went to the local police station. An officer photographed the bruises, collected the medical paperwork, and took our statements separately. Phoebe spoke with a child interview specialist while Jonah and I waited. I hated that she had to explain the incident again, but allowing my family to rewrite the story would teach her that truth mattered less than an adult's comfort. Before we left, the officer warned us that police would contact everyone who had been in the dining room. My phone began ringing before we reached the parking lot. My mother called 6 times. My father left 2 messages demanding that I call immediately. Bryce sent a voice message instead. He said he was sorry Phoebe had fallen, but he had barely touched her. He claimed she had ignored him and behaved like a spoiled child. Then he said I should thank him for teaching her manners. That message erased any doubt I had about moving forward. It was not an apology. It was a confession wrapped in an excuse. I saved the recording and emailed a copy to myself. My mother finally reached me that afternoon. Denise did not ask how Phoebe was feeling. She asked whether I understood what a police report could do to Bryce's future. She said he had an interview coming up and could not afford a criminal accusation. When I told her Phoebe had a sprained wrist, she replied that children healed quickly. My father took the phone and accused me of using the law to settle old grudges. He said I was destroying Bryce over a moment of frustration. I reminded him that he had watched his adult son shove an 8-year-old girl and blamed the child's mother. He hung up. That evening, my cousin Wesley Monroe called. Wesley was a freelance videographer who had been recording the children decorating cookies before the incident. His voice sounded uneasy when he asked whether the police had contacted me. Then he told me his camera had continued recording after the decorating ended. The footage showed Phoebe walking toward the dessert table. It showed Bryce stepping into her path, grabbing her shoulder, and pushing her. It also captured him calling her a spoiled brat while she was still on the floor. Most damaging of all, the camera recorded my parents defending him before either checked whether Phoebe was hurt. Wesley sent me the original file with its timestamp and promised not to alter or post it. I gave a copy to the police and stored 2 more insecure folders. Bryce still believed the room contained only frightened relatives whose memories could be pressured into changing. He had no idea the truth had been recorded from beginning to end. The evidence was clear, but I was about to learn that clear evidence would not stop my family from trying to erase it. 2 days after Christmas, I sent my parents a written message explaining our boundaries. Bryce was not permitted to contact Phoebe directly or indirectly. My parents could request a supervised visit only if Bryce was absent, and only after they acknowledged that what he had done was wrong. I kept the message factual and avoided insults. My mother replied within 5 minutes. She called my conditions cruel, controlling, and designed to punish them for loving their son. My father wrote that no daughter had the right to dictate who could live in his home. I reminded him that I was not ordering Bryce to leave. I was deciding who would have access to my child. Martin responded that I was using Phoebe as a weapon. That became the phrase my family repeated whenever they wanted my boundaries to sound abusive. Bryce posted an Instagram story claiming his sister was destroying the family because of a misunderstanding over dessert. He included a short clip recorded on someone's phone. It showed Phoebe reaching for the cookie plate, then jumped forward to the moment I was yelling for Jonah to get our coats. The shove had been removed. Bryce wrote that I had always hated him and was teaching my daughter to lie for attention. Several relatives shared the story before asking what happened. My aunt said Bryce was under enormous stress because he had lost his job. A cousin told me children sometimes exaggerated when they wanted sympathy. Not one asked to see the medical report. Not one asked whether Phoebe was sleeping or could use her wrist. I refused to argue on social media. Instead, I created a folder containing screenshots, voicemails, medical records, police documents, and a detailed timeline. Because I worked as a compliance coordinator for a medical equipment distributor, documentation was part of my daily life. At work, I was trained to separate emotion from evidence. At home, that habit became one of the only things keeping me grounded. Jonah installed another camera over our driveway and checked every lock. He did not tell me what decision to make or speak on my behalf. He asked what would help me feel safer, and then did it. We updated Fee's school records, removed my parents from the emergency contact list, and provided the office with a photograph of Bryce. The principal assured us that no one outside the approved list would be allowed to speak with or collect Phoebe. A week later, the school called. My mother had contacted the office and claimed there had been a misunderstanding. She asked to be restored as an emergency contact because she had frequently picked Phoebe up before. When the secretary refused, Denise said I was going through an emotional crisis and might not be making rational decisions. That lie frightened me more than the angry calls. My mother was no longer merely defending Bryce. She was creating a story that could be used to question my judgment as a parent. I documented the call and asked the school to communicate only through email about future contact from my family. Phoebe returned to class after winter break, but she was different. During a classroom party, she refused to take a cupcake until her teacher asked 3 times. At home, she began requesting permission before touching food already placed on her plate. One evening, she asked whether Uncle Bryce might come to school and push her again if she made him angry. Jonah and I arranged for her to meet with the school counselor. The counselor explained that adults were responsible for controlling their own bodies and emotions. She helped Phoebe practice saying, "Do not touch me," and taught her which trusted adults to find if she felt unsafe. Those sessions were not about teaching Phoebe to fear the world. They were about restoring the confidence one adult had taken from her in seconds. Snorts. Meanwhile, the police interviewed my parents. Both claimed the shove had been accidental. My father said Phoebe had been running around the table. My mother said Bryce had reached out to stop her from knocking over a tray. Their statements contradicted each other, and neither matched the video. When officers interviewed Bryce, he admitted placing his hand on Phoebe, but claimed she stumbled because the floor was slippery. He apparently did not know police had the original recording. The prosecutor assigned to the case was Erin Wallace. She reviewed the footage, medical records, voice message, and witness statements. She called to explain that the evidence supported criminal charges, and Bryce would soon be required to appear in court. Erin warned that the legal process would not be fast or emotionally clean. The defense might attack my parenting, my relationship with Bryce, and even Phoebe's behavior. I told her I understood. I had spent my childhood watching my parents protect Bryce by putting everyone else on trial. This time, there was evidence they could not intimidate. That evening, my mother left a voicemail saying she and my father were speaking with a family attorney. She said grandparents had rights and that if I refused to be reasonable, they would ask a judge to force me to let them see Phoebe. The threat confirmed that they still believed access to my daughter was something they were entitled to, even while denying the harm done to her. When their public story began collapsing, they stopped asking me to forgive Bryce and started looking for a court that could force me back into line. Bryce's first court appearance took place in late January. Jonah sat beside me while Wesley waited outside the courtroom in case the prosecutor needed him. My parents arrived with Bryce and a defense attorney named Douglas Keene. Denise held Bryce's arm as though he were the injured child in the case. Martin stared at me with an expression that made it clear he considered my presence a betrayal. When Bryce entered the courtroom, he looked confident. He had cut his hair, worn a dark suit, and prepared the expression of a man unfairly accused. His attorney described the incident as a brief family misunderstanding. He said Bryce had attempted to prevent Phoebe from grabbing food before dinner and that she lost her balance when he reached toward her. Erin Wallace responded by informing the court that the state possessed video showing intentional physical contact, medical documentation of injury, and a voice message in which Bryce blamed the child. The judge issued a temporary order of protection. Bryce was forbidden from contacting Phoebe, approaching our home, appearing at her school, or using another person to communicate with her. He was allowed to continue living with my parents because Phoebe did not live there. But the judge warned that my parents could not help him avoid the order. My mother cried outside the courtroom and accused me of trying to make Bryce homeless. I reminded her that no one had ordered him out of her house. She answered that I had created an impossible situation because family gatherings could no longer include everyone. That was the first time I understood how completely she viewed Phoebe's safety as an inconvenience. Over the next several weeks, Bryce's attorney tried to negotiate a dismissal. He argued that the injury was minor and that Bryce had no prior criminal convictions. Erin refused to dismiss the case because the video showed deliberate conduct followed by a lack of remorse. She did, however, offer a resolution that included probation, community service, anger management, and a final order of protection instead of a lengthy jail sentence. Bryce rejected it. He was convinced my parents could discredit me and that a jury would view the case as family drama. The trial began in early spring. Wesley testified first. He explained that he had been recording the children decorating cookies and had left his camera running while he packed his equipment. The defense suggested he had edited the footage because he was closer to me than to Bryce. Wesley calmly provided the original memory card, file information, and continuous recording. There was no missing time, no cut, no change in angle. Then the prosecutor played the video. The room became silent as Phoebe appeared on the screen. She walked toward the table and reached for a cookie. Bryce stepped into her path. His hand closed around her shoulder. He pushed. Phoebe fell sideways and struck the chair. He did not look surprised. He did not bend down to help her. He stood over her and called her a spoiled brat. My mother's voice was heard immediately saying that he had not meant it. My father's voice followed, telling me to stop overreacting. The recording destroyed every version they had given police. Phoebe had not been running. She had not slipped. She had not nearly knocked over a tray. During cross-examination, Bryce's lawyer asked whether Wesley disliked Bryce. Wesley said the question was irrelevant because his feelings could not change what the camera had captured. Jonah testified about Phoebe's condition after the fall and the urgent care visit. His experience as a physical therapist made him careful not to exaggerate. He explained that the injury was not catastrophic, but it was painful, documented, and completely avoidable. When I testified, the defense tried to turn the case into a history of sibling resentment. Douglas asked whether I believed Bryce had always been my parents' favorite. I said he had often been protected from consequences, but favoritism did not move his hand. Douglas asked whether I had threatened legal action before checking Phoebe's injuries. I explained that I had photographed the swelling, removed my daughter from danger, taken her to urgent care, and filed a report based on medical advice. Every question designed to make me look vindictive brought the case back to the same fact. Bryce had shoved a child and blamed her for it. My mother testified that Bryce was a loving uncle who had reacted without thinking. Erin asked Denise why she told police that Phoebe slipped if she now admitted Bryce had reacted physically. My mother hesitated, then said she had been confused. Erin asked why she had not checked Phoebe's wrist before defending Bryce. Denise said she knew the injury was not serious. Erin asked how she could have known without examining her. My mother had no answer. My father testified that I had become cold since marrying Jonah. Erin asked him whether Jonah appeared anywhere in the video before Bryce pushed Phoebe. He admitted he did not. She asked whether Jonah had forced Bryce to insult an 8-year-old. Martin became angry and accused the prosecutor of twisting his words. That outburst did more damage than any question could have done. After the prosecution rested, Bryce's attorney requested a recess. The video had made acquittal unlikely, and the contradictions in my parents' testimony had weakened the defense. Bryce finally accepted a plea agreement. He admitted that he had intentionally made physical contact with Phoebe and caused her injury. The judge sentenced him to supervised probation, community service, mandatory anger management, and a final order of protection. She warned him that any attempt to contact or approach Phoebe would be treated as a new offense and a violation of probation. Bryce stood before the judge and said he understood. Outside the courthouse, however, he told my parents he had accepted the agreement only because the system was biased against men. He never apologized to Phoebe. That night, he posted that innocent people sometimes pleaded guilty because vindictive relatives had more money and influence. My parents shared the post. 2 weeks later, I received papers informing me that Denise and Martin had petitioned family court for grandparent visitation. Bryce had finally been held accountable, but my parents treated the judgment as an opening move rather than an ending. Before Christmas, my parents had been part of Fee's life. They, Snorts, had watched her 2 weekends each month, attended school events, and kept a bedroom ready for her at their house. That history gave them enough standing to ask family court to consider visitation, but it did not guarantee they would receive it. Their petition claimed I had suddenly cut off a loving relationship because they refused to abandon Bryce. They described me as angry, unstable, and controlled by my husband. They said Phoebe was suffering because I had removed her grandparents out of spite. My attorney was Leah Kim, a family lawyer known for being calm, even when everyone around her was emotional. During our first meeting, Leah told me not to build the case around punishing my parents for supporting Bryce. The question was whether contact with them was currently in Fee's best interest. She asked me to collect every communication since Christmas. The record told a clear story. My parents had called repeatedly, but none of their messages asked whether Phoebe's wrist had healed. They had demanded that I withdraw the police report, criticized me for cooperating with the prosecutor, and complained about legal expenses. They had asked when they could see Phoebe, but never whether she was afraid, embarrassed, or receiving counseling. Leah also obtained the school's report about my mother's attempt to restore herself as an emergency contact. Then, the situation escalated. One Friday afternoon, the school principal called me. Denise and Martin were standing in the front office claiming they had permission to take Phoebe out for a grandparent visit. They did not have permission. The secretary checked the restricted contact notes and refused to release her. My father became loud enough that the school resource officer was called. My parents eventually left, but not before Martin announced that a judge would soon give them the right to take their granddaughter whenever they wanted. Phoebe never saw them because the principal kept her in class, but the attempted pickup became part of the court record. My parents later claimed they had only wanted to deliver a birthday gift. The security footage showed no gift in either of their hands. Wesley provided the most damaging evidence. Although he had distanced himself from my parents after the criminal case, he was still included in an extended family group chat. My mother wrote that if she could spend one afternoon alone with Phoebe, she could help the child remember that Bryce had never meant to push her. My father replied that 8-year-olds were easily influenced and that I had confused Phoebe by repeating the word assault. Denise then said Phoebe needed to understand that telling the truth could bring the family back together. Wesley took screenshots and sent them to me. Their words revealed that visitation was not simply about maintaining a grandparent relationship. They intended to pressure my daughter to change how she understood and described the event. At the hearing, my parents' attorney presented photographs of holidays, zoo trips, and school concerts. My mother cried while describing how much she missed Phoebe. She said she had been like a second mother to her granddaughter. Leah did not deny that they had once shared a close bond. Instead, she asked what Denise had done when Phoebe was injured. My mother said she had tried to calm everyone down. Leah asked when Denise first called to inquire about Phoebe's wrist. My mother could not provide a date. Leah showed her the phone records. There was no such call. She displayed messages in which Denise worried about Bryce's job interview, but never asked whether Phoebe could write, dress herself, or sleep comfortably. My mother said she assumed I would tell her if the injury were serious. Leah asked why she had assumed the child was fine while telling relatives that I was exaggerating. Denise began crying again. My father testified that Jonah had isolated me from my family. Leah asked him to identify a single message in which Jonah had threatened, insulted, or ordered either of them to stay away. He could not. Every written boundary had come from me. Martin then claimed I could not have made those decisions without my husband's influence because I had never been confrontational before. Leah replied that a person becoming more assertive after her child was injured was not evidence of coercion. The judge assigned to the case was Margaret Winslow. She reviewed the criminal record, school report, group chat messages, and counseling notes showing Phoebe's anxiety after the incident. Judge Winslow acknowledged that my parents had once maintained a meaningful relationship with Phoebe. She also stated that a past relationship did not excuse present conduct. The court was especially concerned by their attempt to remove Phoebe from school without permission and their plan to influence her account of an event already established by video and a criminal judgment. Judge Winslow denied the petition. She warned my parents not to appear at Phoebe's school, home, or activities without written permission. She explained that respect for parental boundaries was essential if they ever hoped to rebuild trust. My mother sobbed. My father stood and accused the court of helping me destroy the family. The judge told him another outburst could result in contempt. Outside, my parents refused to look at me. I thought the ruling would finally make them stop. Instead, it convinced them that following legal channels had failed and that they needed to find another way around me. The judge had denied them access, but the message they took from the ruling was not stop. It was find another door. For several months, there were no direct confrontations. Bryce attended anger management, completed part of his community service, and reported regularly to his probation officer. Through extended relatives, I heard that he had received a conditional offer to manage a new restaurant near Albany. Snorts. The owners were willing to overlook his conviction as long as he completed probation without further violations. It was more generosity than Bryce had shown Phoebe, and I hoped the opportunity might finally encourage him to change. Instead, he treated it as proof that the consequences were disappearing. My parents continued telling relatives that Bryce's record could be corrected if Phoebe admitted he had never intended to hurt her. They convinced themselves that an 8-year-old child possessed the power to undo a guilty plea, a protection order, and months of documented behavior. In December, nearly a year after the original incident, Phoebe's school announced a winter arts fundraiser. She had created a short illustrated story that would be displayed in the library, and she had practiced for weeks to read part of it aloud. The event was open to families and invited guests, but the school still maintained the restriction against my parents and Bryce. The morning of the fundraiser, Jonah and I reminded the office to call us if anyone from my family appeared. I did not tell Phoebe because I wanted her to enjoy the evening without expecting danger. The program had just begun when a teacher quietly approached me. A man matching Bryce's photograph had been seen near the hallway leading to the library. Jonas stayed with Phoebe's class while I followed the teacher toward the front office. Before we reached it, I heard Phoebe's voice. She sounded frightened. Bryce had entered through a side door with my father. Martin had registered as a guest, using an invitation forwarded by a distant relative, then told a volunteer that Bryce was an old family friend named Brian. They had waited until the hall became crowded and separated from the main group. Bryce found Phoebe outside the library while she was waiting with her teacher. He crouched in front of her and told her she needed to fix what she had done. He said she should tell the adults he had never pushed her and that her mother had made everything sound worse. Phoebe stepped backward and said he was not allowed to talk to her. Bryce reached toward her arm, but the teacher moved between them. When I arrived, Bryce was arguing that he had a right to speak with his niece. My father stood behind him, insisting that no one was in danger. I told the teacher to take Phoebe to Jonah. Then I looked at Bryce and asked whether his probation officer knew where he was. His expression changed. Until that moment, he had apparently believed my father's presence would make the violation look like an accidental family encounter. The school resource officer arrived with 2 administrators. Bryce claimed he had only wanted to apologize, but Phoebe's teacher repeated exactly what she had heard. He had not apologized. He had tried to make a child change her account. The officer confirmed the active protection order and placed Bryce under arrest. My father shouted that I had set them up. I reminded him that I had not invited either of them, opened the door for them, or brought Bryce within feet of the child he was legally ordered to avoid. Martin refused to leave until the officer warned him that he could also be arrested for trespassing. As Bryce was led away, he turned toward me and yelled that I had ruined every chance he had to rebuild his life. I said nothing. His life had been offered another chance. He had used it to frighten my daughter at school. The hallway cameras recorded Bryce entering with my father. A volunteer confirmed that Martin had provided a false name for him. The teacher gave a statement about Bryce pressuring Phoebe. The evidence was immediate and impossible to reframe as confusion. Bryce was charged with violating the protection order and criminal contempt. His probation officer filed a violation report, and the restaurant withdrew its job offer. At the hearing, Bryce's attorney argued that he had not threatened or injured Phoebe. The judge responded that the order prohibited contact, not merely violence. Bryce had knowingly approached a protected child and attempted to influence her description of the crime for which he was on probation. His probation was revoked. He received time in county jail, additional counseling requirements, and an extended protection order. My father was permanently banned from school property and cited for trespassing. Leah also helped us request a family court protection order against both of my parents. We presented the attempted school pickup, the group chat messages, the rejected visitation petition, and Martin's role in bringing Bryce into the fundraiser under a false identity. Judge Winslow granted a long-term stay-away order covering our home, Phoebe's school, and her activities. My mother blamed me for the result, but even she could not claim she had not been warned. Wesley cut off contact with my parents after learning what Martin had done. He said helping Bryce reach Phoebe was not loyalty. It was participation. Watching the handcuffs close around Bryce, I finally understood that consequences had not destroyed him. His refusal to accept responsibility had. 18 months later, Jonah and I moved to another community in the capital region. We did not move because Bryce had defeated us or because my parents had frightened us out of our home. We moved because Phoebe deserved a school where the office staff did not recognize her grandparents from security alerts, and where a winter fundraiser could be only a winter fundraiser. Jonah found a position at a larger rehabilitation clinic, and I arranged to work from home 3 days a week. Phoebe entered her new school quietly, but within a month she had joined an art club and made 2 close friends. Her new teacher told us she was thoughtful, observant, and unusually good at noticing when another child felt excluded. The fear around food gradually disappeared. One afternoon, I watched her walk into the kitchen, take a cookie from a cooling rack, and call out to ask whether anyone else wanted one. She was not nervous. She did not apologize. It was an ordinary moment, which made it feel extraordinary. Wesley remained part of our lives. He visited every few weeks, taught Phoebe how to use a simple camera, and never asked her to discuss the Christmas incident. He understood that being a safe adult meant allowing a child to be more than the worst thing that had happened to her. Bryce eventually completed his jail sentence, but the protection order remained in place. He was required to continue counseling and could not approach us through relatives. I heard that he worked overnight shifts at a warehouse and still told people I had destroyed his career. I no longer needed him to understand the truth. Accountability did not depend on his agreement. My parents sent letters through their attorney. The letters said they missed Phoebe and wanted the family restored. None of them acknowledged the attempt to remove her from school, the plan to change her story, or my father's decision to escort Bryce into the fundraiser. They asked for reconciliation without responsibility. I did not respond. For a long time, I felt guilty that Phoebe had lost an entire side of her family. I worried that one day she would accuse me of taking away grandparents who had once loved her. Counseling helped me understand that love without safety was not enough. Adults could feel affection for a child and still behave in ways that made access to that child dangerous. Being related to Phoebe did not give anyone the right to ignore her boundaries, frighten her, or use her as a tool to protect another adult. I also learned that forgiveness and access were not the same thing. A person could release anger without reopening the door. A child should never be required to hug, visit, or forgive someone simply because that person was family. Real reconciliation required an honest acknowledgement of harm, respect for boundaries, and consistent change over time. My parents wanted the reward of reconciliation without doing any of that work. The most important lesson came from Phoebe herself. One evening, she asked why adults sometimes said sorry, but continued doing the same thing. I told her that a real apology was not only a sentence, it was changed behavior. It meant naming what you had done, understanding how it affected someone, accepting the consequences, and choosing not to repeat it. She thought about that, then said Bryce had never really apologized. I told her she was right. I also told her it had never been her responsibility to make him become a better person. Protecting a child is not revenge. Revenge seeks pain for its own sake. Accountability protects people, establishes consequences, and prevents harm from being repeated. Filing the police report did not destroy my family. The destruction began when Bryce chose violence, and my parents chose denial. Every opportunity afterward gave them a chance to change direction. They could have checked on Phoebe, admitted the truth, respected the protection order, or accepted the court's decision. Instead, they kept choosing Bryce's comfort over a child's safety. Cutting contact was not a failure of love, it was an act of responsibility. Phoebe was learning that her body belonged to her, that trustworthy adults listened when she said she felt unsafe, and that peace was not valuable when it required silence about harm. She was also learning that family could be built from people who showed up with honesty, respect, and care. Some of those people shared our blood, others did not. What mattered was how they treated her when it counted. I used to replay that Christmas and imagine what might have happened if my mother had rushed to Phoebe instead of defending Bryce, or if my father had told his son to leave instead of telling me to calm down. One honest reaction could have changed everything. But I could not rewrite their choices. I could only decide what my daughter would learn from mine. If keeping the peace required teaching Phoebe that adults could hurt her without consequences, then that peace was never worth protecting. I chose my daughter's safety over my family's approval, and I would make the same choice every single